On behalf of the new member for Port Stephens, I acknowledge the presence in the gallery today of family, friends and supporters of the member for Port Stephens. I welcome you to the Legislative Assembly today to listen to the inaugural speech, and I call the member for Port Stephens.
Mr Deputy Speaker, parliamentary colleagues, friends and family, thank you for your warm welcome. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered, the Gadigal, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I now represent in this Parliament, the Worimi, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. I am humbled and honoured to stand in the chamber today as the new member for Port Stephens. Might I add to Madam Speaker's list of firsts, unfortunately she's not sitting today, I too am the first woman to represent Port Stephens in this place. Mr Deputy Speaker, Port Stephens is a place of great beauty, inspiration and history. It stretches from Tea Gardens, Hawk's Nest in the north, to the Hunter River and Tomago in the south, from the rural beauty of Duns Creek in the west to the stunning Tomaree Peninsula and Broughton Island in the east. Port Stephens is blessed with natural beauty. It has the most beautiful beaches in New South Wales. Pristine coastal habitats, and is world-renowned for its dolphins and koalas. I'm proud to say that we also have the largest marine park in New South Wales, a great Labor achievement. Port Stephens is positively brimming with potential. Port Stephens' potential was recognised early on in Australia's history. In 1899, land on the northern side of the bay was identified as one of 40 potential sites for Australia's first capital. The site is now known as the lovely hamlet of North Arm Cove. Tanilba House was built by convicts from 1837, and at the same time the National Trust listed Tomago House was being built by the Windeyer family in Tomago. Fort Tomaree played an important role in Australia's East Coast defence during World War II, and Boomerang Park in Raymond Terrace, they celebrated Federation. Light horses trained for the Boer War, and our troops marshalled there for both World Wars. Today, Port Stephens has a diverse economy, spanning from hospitality and tourism to heavy manufacturing, from primary production to aerospace endeavours. It is with a great deal of pride that I can class as one of my neighbours the Royal Australian Air Force at the base at Williamtown. The RAF base employs 3,500 people, with most of the servicemen and servicewomen posted to RAF Williamtown choosing to live in Port Stephens. Their involvement in our schools, sporting and volunteer organisations makes my community stronger. Port Stephens is very fortunate to not only host the RAF, but also Newcastle Airport, and they are both significant contributors to the local economy in Port Stephens and the Hunter. So, you can see, in addition to its breathtaking beauty, the people of Port Stephens have a lot to be proud of. But, like many people who live in Port Stephens, I didn't grow up there. It's a place where people choose to live. Almost 9 years ago, immediately prior to the impending birth of my third daughter, Lily, my family and I moved to Medowie, a town in the heart of Port Stephens. Medowie is a community of about 9,000 people, largely populated by young families. We moved from Newcastle to Medowie with a view to returning to a simpler way of life, a back-to-basics program, if you like. We now have 26 chooks, an unkempt veggie garden and 2 crazy dogs. On my way home, I usually get to wave at our local kangaroos. It's a place where I quickly felt at home because I grew up in country New South Wales. My father was a public school principal. My mother was also a teacher. Professions that are not only vocations, but a lifestyle choice. Whilst they chose to shape young people's lives, it also meant a few moves for our family. We started out in Mulwala on the New South Wales-Victorian border. Then we moved to Tumut and ended up in Albury. I schooled in the local public schools and I enjoyed all the benefits of a public school education. An education which allowed me entry to the University of Sydney to study arts and law. My parents have been public education advocates for as long as I can remember, with my father opting to take positions in areas of disadvantage and my mum a TAFE teacher. So it comes as no surprise that I bring that same passion for equality of access to education to this role. My parents came from different sides of the track. My mother's mum grew up on the waterfront in Rose Bay and married a Macquarie Street doctor who was a Sydney University medalist in medicine. We would visit them when they lived in Wagga Wagga, where my granddad, Dr. Kenny, had established the first radiology practice. My dad's father, Bert Washington, was a battler. Having left school in Leeton at the age of 14, he went to work in a gold mine at West Wyalong. He was then on the Wallaby during the Depression, ending up on the show circuit, where he spent much of the rest of his life. He was, literally, a showman. Or a showy. Whilst education is the great equaliser, so is war, and both my grandfathers enlisted in the army and served in PNG. I loved visiting Popper during Christmas school holidays because I got to work the clowns in his backyard show at Echelon Beach. I then graduated to the merry-go-round when I was considered responsible enough. From across the generations, from both sides of the track, the importance of hard work and respect was instilled in me, values that stood me well in my professional career as a lawyer, and I believe will continue to do so in my role here. Throughout my professional career, there were many people that have given me opportunities that I'm very grateful for. The late Tony Dutton was the best lawyer I've ever known, hard-working with a great intellect, humility and humour. I also thank Catherine Henry, my former partner, for her generosity and understanding. Many people would be aware of the recent storm event which smashed the Hunter and other areas. Port Stephens was one of the areas declared a natural disaster zone. The sheer length, breadth and extent of the harm was astonishing and unprecedented. My heart goes out to those who have lost loved ones, suffered the loss of their homes, suffered the loss of their family's income, and those that continue to suffer in other ways from the harsh hand that Mother Nature has dealt. I give my heartfelt thanks to the local SES and RFS volunteers for their extraordinary efforts and bravery during the emergency and recovery stage of this natural disaster. The natural environment in Port Stephens is something my community values. However, our area is at risk of overdevelopment. I recognise the efforts of the community group, Voices of Wallalong and Woodville, in representing their community's interests until ultimately the ICAC acted on your concerns. I also recognise the efforts of the Boomerang Park Action Group, Say No to Sand Mining in Bob's Farm, Tomaree Ratepayer and Residents Association, Williamtown and Surrounds Residents Action Group, South Tomaree Community Association and the Port Stephens Eco Network. The sheer number of groups that are formed in Port Stephens is indicative of the difficulty our community has had having its voice heard in the face of developments that risk quality of life and environmental sustainability. The number of community action groups in Port Stephens is also a reflection of the level of concern within my community about the lack of transparency, accountability and integrity in planning decisions and processes at a local and state government level. The concern is not without foundation. My community has been touched by ICAC, and I'm very grateful for it. Not because it's seen political opponents come undone, but because it's shed light where it was needed, and in doing so, allowed people to live their lives free from harassment. Corruption is not just a theoretical concept or something you read about in the newspaper that brings politicians down. It hurts people and it hurts communities. And it's been hurting people in my community for far too long. I will respect the trust placed in me by my community. I will act with integrity and I will continue to stand against corruption in all forms and on all fronts. Other challenges being faced by the people of Port Stephens are like those in many other rural and regional communities in New South Wales. We have a dire need for mental health support, particularly for our youth. There is a dire need for better access to vocational training, TAFE and jobs. Unemployment in Port Stephens is at crisis point, with the unemployment rate being more than double the state average. There is a dire need to increase local health services, improve public transport, increase support for people escaping domestic violence, together with the need for more affordable housing. And yet, in Port Stephens, these challenges have been exacerbated by decisions by a government that would appear to have very little understanding of what's happening in rural and regional New South Wales. In Port Stephens, in the past 4 years, we have seen community psychology services shut down, the local domestic violence refuge defunded, then propped up at the last minute in a lesser form. And we have seen our local community college lose funding to deliver the courses where we have a skills shortage in aged care and childcare. The decision to centralise services may make sense on paper to bureaucrats, but it often makes no sense whatsoever when it's applied in rural and regional communities. The government's so-called reforms, smart and skilled, and going home, staying home, have only hurt my community. As a proud member of Country Labor, I pledge to be an advocate for rural and regional communities in this place. Each of us has issues that sit higher in our hearts. One of these, for me, having been a health lawyer, is the right of all people living with disabilities to have greater autonomy and choice. The National Disability Insurance Scheme, or the NDIS, is landmark legislation because it enshrines in law the concept of choice. The New South Wales launch site of the NDIS was in Newcastle, so I've witnessed firsthand its promise and its pitfalls. I believe it is incumbent on all members of this Parliament to ensure that the aims of the NDIS are met and that real choice is delivered to people living with disabilities. It would be a shame if federally we talk the talk and state we don't walk the walk. In my view, the government's plans to completely privatise state-run disability and home care services risks the success of the NDIS in New South Wales and places the most vulnerable people in our communities at risk. As a member of the 56th Parliament of New South Wales, I hope to contribute to the success of the NDIS as it is rolled out across the state. Another issue close to my heart and closer to home is a fight for a public high school in my hometown of Medowie. So many people have now heard about Medowie High School. That doesn't exist.
I want to hear it again.
Say it again. I know you do, Ryan. This has been a long-standing battle in my community. For the past 8 years, I've stood alongside members of my community and fought for our children's right to have access to local public secondary schooling. Land was designated for a high school in Medowie and purchased by the Department of Education in 1983. To this day, the land remains untouched. As we in the Labor Party know, education is key to ensuring equality of opportunity. Any barriers to accessing education should be minimised. Currently, we have 1,000 children being bussed out of my community daily just to access public secondary schooling. And yet the government doesn't think there's merit in the proposal. Perhaps they need to look at the election result. Or better still, they should have taken heed of their own representative in Parliament. On 1 June 2010, the former member for Port Stephens, Craig Bowman, addressed this chamber as follows. I speak today about one of the most important issues in my electorate, the need for a high school in Medowie. On this, I couldn't agree with Craig Bowman more. The only reason I'm standing here today is because so many people contributed to this long-running campaign to return Port Stephens to Labor. Some of the people who contributed have travelled to be here today, and I thank you so much for making the effort. I'm delighted to be sharing this experience with you. I'll start with the people who were there from the start. Thanks, Mum and Dad. Bert and Leslie Washington, for your unwavering and unqualified love and support over my entire life. Whilst there were no doubt times you were uncertain about the direction I was headed, you have instilled in me values of social justice that are with me to my core. To my patient and caring husband, Andrew Hardy, and my 3 beautiful daughters, Phoebe, Tess and Lily, I love you all dearly. You Stephen. And I thank you for your willingness to join me on this adventure. Thank you to my big brothers Stuart and Damon Washington and their amazing families. I'm delighted to see Ava and Ruby Washington here today too. I owe thanks to someone special who couldn't make it here today, the Honourable Bob Martin, who was the first member for Port Stephens and a wonderful minister for the fisheries in the first Carr government. I thank Bob and his wife Margaret for their unwavering support and friendship, and I hope they are enjoying their travels. They even helped me door knock in Anabate. A huge thank you to Sophie Cotz's MLC and Courtney Hussos MLC for your support and guidance over a number of years. I also thank New South Wales ALP General Secretary Jamie Clements and Assistant General Secretary Kayla Murnane, who believed that we could secure Port Stephens for the Labor Party. A very special thank you to Luke Foley for being a regular visitor to Port Stephens, and John Robertson before him. Thank you also to the members of the Parliamentary Labor Party and their staff, who were always on hand to give advice, together with the many shadow ministers who made the effort to visit Port Stephens, including the former shadow minister, Steve Wan. Now, to my local champions, the branches and community members who worked so hard. From the very beginning, branch members were unified and unwavering in their support. Prior to the election, I recall driving home from a branch meeting, almost in tears, because I was overwhelmed by the kindness and generosity from those people. I feel like I now have an enormous family in Port Stephens, and I look forward to sharing this experience with you all over the coming years. I'm glad to say that there are now too many branch members to name individually, but I'd like to mention a few. Grant Kennett, Fred and Glenys McInerney, Jim and Lois Morrison, Graham and Elaine Froment, Alex Smith, Frank Corner, Bay Marshall, Ova Blanche, Bobby Antonick, Jenny Batrick, Ros Armstrong, Helen McLean, Lynn Lockett and Nancy Hosking. And a special mention for Graham Blythman and Gail Armstrong. I wish you well for the future. A special thank you to the indomitable Frank Ward, OAM, a champion letter writer, former Port Stephens councillor and an amazing advocate for women's rights. And Brian Crooks, another champion letter writer and enormously hard worker. Thank you also to councillors Peter Kafer and Jeff Dingle. There were also too many community members to name who helped me. But I'll mention Tom Lacey and his dog Penny from Raymond Terrace, who drove around with my poster attached to the back of his mobility scooter for months. To all the people who put up signs and got politically active for the first time in their lives, thank you so much. Thank you also to Unions New South Wales and the dedicated members of the PSA, NMA, Teachers Fed, ETU, RTBU and CFMEU for all your assistance. Finally, I thank my hard-working campaign team. From the outset and against the odds, we campaigned hard and achieved the unexpected. Giacomo Arnott, thank you for your commitment over such a long campaign. Thank you also to Ruby Porter for your positive energy and hard work. My final thank you goes to Jay Saval for pulling everything together in the critical last few months of the campaign. Everyone's efforts combined saw us achieve what Sportsbet and the local media didn't see coming. Almost a 20% swing to overcome a 14.7% margin and a win for the party of fairness, equality, social justice, the Labor Party. To the people of Port Stephens, my message is simple. I will work hard to ensure our community gets its fair share. I will work with you and I will work with the government to ensure that their election commitments are delivered for my community, and I will always, always give you the respect you deserve.
Order. May I too congratulate the member for Port Stephens. Welcome to the Bear Pit, and I feel sure you'll be working with a few clowns in here as well. Was that? I'm well, and you? Oh, mate. Whose motion was it? Abahana. So I've got a call here. Only tonight. Oh, I guess so. Is he here? What was the motion? Oh, right. Yeah, he's there. I just called him. Yeah, he's fine. We don't need to reread it. I don't think it's up to you. Order. When the House has cleared, we will resume the motion from the member for Upper Hunter, and I understand the member for Fairfield has sought the call, and I'll just wait until the chamber clears. Member for Fairfield, I'll give you the call. Member for Fairfield.